Hi there. I'm truly honoured to be able to introduce you today to one of my good friends, but also probably one of the most intelligent people that I know. My good friend David Powell. David has over 25 years' experience in both local and international businesses, and he's a sought-after mentor for companies looking to expand around the world. David has taken and held a variety of roles, both the public and private sector. He's including that as senior roles with Trade New Zealand and New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, as well as undertaking consulting projects with Austrade in Australia, Bell Trade in South America, International Trade Centre in Geneva, and the Pacific Islands Trade and Investment. David is currently engaged by the University of Otago to partner with businesses on innovative projects in biotech and food and health sectors in New Zealand and abroad, including other sectors of business as well. He is also an author, an investor. He's director of Lost Art Discoveries, a consulting group that specializes in business growth, innovation, future thinking, economic development. That's just a brief introduction to David. There's so much more I could say. And so we're really honored to have you with, I'm really honored to have you with me today, David. So thank you very much for making the time to catch up. And I just wonder if you would just, as a futurist, as someone who thinks very seriously about business and what is happening around you. I know it's a huge question, but with your vast knowledge of social trends, of politics and business cycles around the world, what is your prognosis for New Zealand at a time like this? I guess post COVID-19, whenever that's going to be. What is your thoughts of what our future is going to look like?
It's a great question, and I guess a question that literally billions of people around the world are going to try and answer over the next little while. And I think it's amazing because not too long ago, 2007, 2009, what we called the GFC, the global financial crisis happened, and I was doing corporate consulting at the time with CBA. And there was a lot of work that we were doing, a lot of thinking we were doing on the new normal. It was the first time I actually heard that. But when you look at what happened then and what happened now, there's really no comparison. As far as I remember, we had a slowdown, and actually the corporate group I was with had such a slowdown that I actually left them and went and started my own company. But I'll come back to that a bit later. But really there wasn't a lot. Well, I noticed that my interest rates on my house mortgage actually went down dramatically, which actually helped my my life a lot. And that's one of the key things I can remember. Obviously I had some friends that were impacted by it, but we came out of it in 2009, 2010, probably a lot not the same as we went into it, just a little bit of fine tuning. But when we actually look now at what's happening, we actually, the world has changed quite dramatically in what seems like a few weeks. And I've been sort of actually housebound since the 16th of March because I had been in Melbourne and had to come back and go into 14 days isolation. But after about a week, of course, I was joined by the whole of New Zealand. So that was, made me not as lonely. But what we look at now is this world that one moment, we thought, oh yes, some people who have got the flu in China. And now, of course, some very real things that have happened to our economy. Firstly, employment massively hit. So not only has there been a lot of people who just can't get to their jobs and therefore create economic value, there are a lot of people who have lost jobs. And I do know of a lot of companies that actually saw this crisis as too good an opportunity for them to actually get rid of people. It was just quite, I found quite callous. Within a few weeks of this likely to happen, people were shedding staff. And actually one of my best friends got made redundant just before the lockdown. And if you can think of the worst time to go and look for a job, then, so yes, it is quite shocking. So we're going to see massive impacts on employment and on people being able to earn a living. Of course, the constraints that we're seeing in travel, tourism, many people are labeling as dead, or at least on, if not on life support, it's going to be transformed entirely as a way. And I think we can talk about this later, but I think that the tourism industry in New Zealand actually did need some shake-ups. And often, actually, my senior pastor once said to me many years ago, we don't change when we see light, we change when we feel heat. And the heat that is
really
being
good.
applied to sectors, in particular tourism, that hopefully, we might see some changes. In New Zealand, I guess when we say, well, what will the new New Zealand look like? What will 2.0 be? And, like with many difficult questions, the answer comes down to it depends. And in New Zealand, of course, what does it depend on? It actually depends on the government, because New Zealand's quite a unique little country in that the government is the biggest actor, the biggest employer, the biggest investor, the biggest force in any sector that we can think of. So therefore, really, what a few people around the cabinet table, and sure, as we're talking about this, the cabinet has got a massive amount of say in the immediate short-term future of New Zealand. But a cabinet table in New Zealand at any time has got huge impact on what the country does, even commercially and industrially, just because of the fact it's the biggest actor, the biggest investor, as I've said, and probably the biggest thought leader when it comes to agencies that it has that operate in the business realm. And so, what will the government do? And we're already getting a lot of signals, and government is always very good, and as are other commentators, very good at dropping signals and looking at what the response to those signals are. And we've heard talks about, it's going to be a total wipe clean and we're going to reinvent capitalism. That's what the French president said the other day. And I think our prime minister sort of nodded slightly. We've had people saying that, that the system is broken. We need all these things. The Greens are shouting about we need a Green New Deal type thing. Or, there's a lot of things that will be swirling around. But we know that with the government, who are really the only ones who have a lot of money, let's face it, it's our money, or what they can borrow, but they are going to be the ones who determine really the future of New Zealand. So that said, we're watching the government all the time. And I find it a bit worrying sometimes that there isn't a lot of business or economic experience within our current government on both sides of the house, to be fair. So we watch with interest what might drop out of this. But I guess the key trends that I see is that New Zealand has got we make food. We make food very, very well. And one thing that we haven't stopped doing, even in a place like in a time like we have, is we haven't stopped making food. Most of our food manufacturing has stayed in place. Farming has stayed in place. Our exports have carried on. But I think there's going to be some interesting things happen. We've all been queuing at supermarkets. We've all been thinking, well, is this essential? Is this not? But what we have seen is while this has been happening, the rise of the artisan food company. And in particular, an artisan food company that is vertically integrated. And by that, they manufacture their food, they distribute it themselves and have a direct relationship to their customer. And a few days ago, or probably a few weeks ago, we were a bit starting to get a bit cynical about the motivations of some supermarkets who we think were making the most of their position. And so we looked for alternative suppliers. And the nice thing was we started to find, small artisan suppliers who were able to keep working as they were essential food manufacturers, but they started to develop great relationships with their target market. And and it's been great to see craft beer companies, wine companies, chocolate, orchardists, all sorts of different ones start to develop these new lines of supply and new ways of doing business. And they had to do that because previously their largest markets were, for instance, restaurants. And when there are no restaurants to take their business, we've suddenly got this great set of artisan foods being effectively the middle people are being taken out, and the relationship with you and I and many households around New Zealand is one that's going to hopefully be very strong, and it will cause a lot of revolution in the way that we've sourced food.
Mm.
The other side of it is we've in our business models that we have, we've sourced a lot of componentry or even total manufacturing to third countries. And this idea of offshoring, I think we're going to see a lot more onshoring. And our previous interdependence as being part of a global supply chain will come down to far more, an independence. Is, would we be able to make our own test kits? Would we make our own vaccines? Could we start doing our own PPE? All the things that we started looking for, we realized that we couldn't actually get because everyone else in the world wanted them, and the supply lanes that were supplying them to us were effectively captured by someone else. And we realized that the capability that we used to have in New Zealand had disappeared. And I've talked to a lot of professors in textiles and that who were just looking for basic things to create new new goods. That capability had gone. Quite staggering. And so I think we might see a reinvention in New Zealand of key parts of supply chains, and not this sort of if I could coin the term, unholy rush to offshore. And maybe we're going to be happier to pay more for goods because we're certain of their transparency of supply and their origin and the fact that it's creating jobs here in New Zealand. So this idea of growing our localized production. It wasn't too long ago, probably sort of from the 1900s up until about the corporate restructurings of the 1980s, that almost every town in New Zealand had a dairy company, it had a brewery, a newspaper, whole lot of things like that, and it's supermarkets and its own specialty things. And the community worked around these brands and these identities, and they were effectively very, very self-sufficient. In the 80s, companies like Lion Breweries and Dominion Breweries brought up a lot of these brands and mothballed them or got rid of them and shut down lots of things and centralized production. I think we'll see a far more decentralized production. And sure, we might go to level 1 tomorrow and be back to normal. What I'm really interested to know is, have we learnt anything in New Zealand? Will we just try and literally pick up the same thing? Or will we actually be looking for some kind of revolution in the business that we have? So, will we have learnt, which one will we take out of this? Will we take out the kindness, or will we take out the snitching? Which one will we become in the next little while? Yeah. So I think it's really fascinating, and to answer a question with it depends, it's probably disappointing, but yeah, it's certainly one that we know there will be massive opportunities in the things I've been mentioning: the reinvention of tourism, the changing of business relationships with customers and with stakeholders, and a far more direct business model. We know that there will be massive unemployment and a whole lot of redeployment in the labour market. So I guess we've got to see what happens. Yeah. So that's probably enough from me. I think I've raved on for ages.
Now that's been very interesting, David. Really appreciate your thoughts on that. And to be honest, I hadn't really actually given much thought to the fact of that we maybe bring a lot of offshore, the things that we've gone to more offshore manufacturing to actually start to bring it back onshore. And it does make a lot of sense for us to do that. I think that some of the things that we've hopefully learned during this time is that when we let go and we relinquish control of a lot of the means of manufacturing, we can be very exposed to something like this that we never dreamed possible, a worldwide pandemic. And as you said, literally 3 or 4 weeks ago, or probably more than that, but 2 months ago, if you were working for an Air New Zealand as an engineer, aircraft engineer, you'd probably earning $140,000 a year. You think that you get one of the best jobs in the world living in New Zealand, whereas now you don't actually have that job anymore. And so life has changed. And I was talking to someone earlier today, in fact, from America, and we were just saying exactly the same thing. I just wonder how long it'll take for us to go back to what we were doing before, when how much we can learn from this. The development of that, or the redevelopment of the manufacturing sector, certain manufacturing sectors, and wholesalers in New Zealand, and development using innovation that we have in New Zealand to create new products and supply chains, is probably going to take a little while to build those up, and which require capital. And a lot of those people who are going to be doing that are people who have been working as engineers in New Zealand or in other companies that have been made redundant, lost their income. And so I guess the question is, where's capital going to come from to be able to fund the development or redevelopment or the reinvention of those industries that we've, abdicated to overseas suppliers? Where do you think this, and obviously government has got an important role to play in it, but and we've got capacity. I think we've got borrowing capacity in the country in the national level. But how committed do you think that the current government, particularly, would be to providing stimulus packages for local development or local businesses?
Well, I think to be fair, the government has done what it has to do, which is make sure there is still money around. And I sat through a briefing from Callaghan Innovation last Friday, and there is a fair bit of money around for, I guess probably the most obvious is the wage subsidy for companies. The problem is, of course, that money has to be earned, and the estimates that you see, that it's costing $1 billion a day for wage subsidies, not to mention I guess the wider social welfare payments that have continued, and of course we know that there are families like, as I said, my best friends who got made redundant just before the lockdown. Without that payments system, he is probably unable to meet his mortgage and feed his two children. So I guess there has to be effectively a band-aid, but we also can't expect the band-aid to last forever. And as you rightly point out, capital will be required. I'm quite confident that there is still capital out there, and there is money. It's how do you actually access it? Reasonably recently, I joined a website called Sharesies. I don't know if you know it, Tim, where you can invest very small amounts of money into the New Zealand Stock Exchange, either as funds or something. And this there's some figures that was coming out from Sharesies that in the last 4 weeks, there's been a staggering amount of people start their first investments. They've never had investment on their mind. They're just ordinary people like us who just go, well, can't we trust the system? But what we can do is start to take a real interest in how it works and what we can do to take a little bit of self-determination. So to me, it shows that there's money around. And this money is going at the moment, thousands of dollars every day. In fact, the numbers are actually quite staggering. People buying shares, and people that you probably would have seen at the football club, and they would be the last people that would talk to you about finance, are now proudly saying that they're doing dollar cost averaging on Air New Zealand each day, and all of that sort of thing. So I think there is money around. It's how does it get aggregated and put into things. So I guess we'll see. But as I mentioned, the government is going to be pretty key. And this is, of course, where governments can have quite a lot of impact on what sectors do they choose to support or not support. And and will it be will their priorities be tomorrow or next week or whenever we start coming out of level 4? Will those priorities be the same? What will they choose to stimulate? I think we know as New Zealanders who look at the economy where the key areas are, and we've touched on that. Will the government have the same thing? I mean, the Green Party are obviously pushing for massive investment in green or clean tech, green energy and that sort of thing, or rail. Winston Peters wants to make Northport the key economic hub of the country. So there's lots of things that maybe, if you start now, doling out money, it will be because of what the government at this time wants, rather than maybe not necessarily what the best opportunities are. But I guess we have to trust the process. We have to trust the process that key sectors can make the right cases. Having said that, when I start looking at the opportunities that come effectively from, I guess, the more guerrilla type business that we're always interested in, because New Zealand is it's a nation of street fighting small businesses, of guerrilla soldiers rather than corporate soldiers. But when I look at things like crowdfunding and interesting angel or venture funding, there are opportunities to aggregate money and get them funded. So it's looking at things a little bit differently. And we of course now have this lockdown time when we've had a chance to pick up a book and watch a YouTube video. Ignorance now of all these things, there's no excuse for it.
Yeah, and that, absolutely. And I think I didn't know the statistics that you mentioned about so many new entrants into the share market. And, I think there's sort of rather glib sort of, things that people have been saying. Well, this is a good time to pick up, businesses cheaply and pick up assets cheaply and so on. And, the famous George Suarez comment that the best time to invest in a country is when there's blood on the streets. And at the moment, there's blood in virtually every street around the country, around the world. But there's got to be good opportunities out there for those who want to take the risks and those who have got some money to invest. I do have a concern. A good friend of mine is a senior engineer at Auckland Airport. He's one of the few that has still got his job and down at 80% of his income, but he's laid off a whole lot of contractors. They were working on things like the new runway at Auckland Airport, the additional car parking, new hotel, a whole lot of the new terminal building. All of that has been put on hold at Auckland Airport now, and those developments are all there to facilitate, obviously, our continually growing tourism sector. And so, I just think that the impact on that sort of scale in New Zealand, it's I just don't know how long it's going to take for us to sort of get even remotely back to where we were. But to be honest, those sort of big things, I guess, will obviously affect the tourism operators. We're not going to have thousands of people turning up in Matamata to go and see Hobbiton for a while. Sure, there's going to be local tourism, but it's going to be that big sector is which was so important to us, probably almost up there with agriculture and with farming and particularly dairy as a key sector of our economy, is just literally virtually vanished overnight. For me, I love the fact that farming is back in vogue, and everyone loves the farmers again. And I've always said that from our personal, very, very basic view is that the two most important things in life is food and water. And basically, without food and water, it doesn't matter how innovative and how smart you are. If you don't have food, you don't have water, you're not going to live. And in any time, if you're making quality food for people and you're providing clean water for people, there's always got to be a business. There's always got to be opportunities there. And certainly in New Zealand, provide great food. We've got some challenges on the water side, but then there's opportunities there. But I guess from that individual, you got the individual who was an engineer at an aircraft engineer in New Zealand, who's lost their job. You got a good friend of ours is a flight attendant. In fact, of two flight attendants who just lost their jobs, been made redundant. Others have lost small businesses and unlikely to recover, sitting with a whole lot of debt, possibly even with rental payments they can't afford any longer on their business premises. What would you sort of say to someone like that, who, saying, they don't have any money to invest in the stock exchange, they don't have any of that, they've got some smarts, they've got some business ideas. Where do they go to from here?
Yeah, and such a good question. And the last thing people need at that stage, people like me sort of, brightly say, cheer up, it's not that bad, and which of course, we often do as humans, because we want to give comfort when, but we often don't know exactly what those people are going through. But exactly right. How do you start again in a world that's actually a totally different one? And the assumptions that we've made coming into this are not ones that are relevant coming out. At the moment, the best thing that, I think, I was looking at LinkedIn before, and LinkedIn is, as you know, is a sort of effectively a Facebook for business. In many cases, I think it's very overrated. It's like, but what it is great for is connections and knowing where people are, where they've gone to, and if you need to contact them, they're several clicks away, or if you want to contact them. So the first thing I would say to someone who's suddenly found themselves with some time on their hands, some ideas, and want to do something proactive about it, is get onto LinkedIn, revitalize the profile that they have, and just start widening out the tent pegs of their business relationships and wider relationships. Just keep, it's like one of those big funnels. The more people that you have some interaction with, eventually it's going to distill down. And the way that New Zealand works, with less than 2 degrees of separation between almost all of us, by throwing more contacts and more knowledge, you let yourself become, in inverted commas, luckier in how you can make these connections between these degrees of separation. Napoleon once was asked, well, what sort of general do you look for, Napoleon, sir? And he said, I look for lucky generals. And he says, well, how do you know? He said, well, they're the ones who are constantly doing something, out there doing something, looking. And that's, I guess, at the moment, sure, where the out there looking isn't, just like you and I are at the moment, in front of a laptop screen. But what an amazing amount of freedom we have to go anywhere in the world on this laptop screen, read almost any book that's ever been published, and delve into many people's minds. So often we go, oh, if only we'd love to write that book or start that business or take that opportunity or write that letter to somebody, but I don't have any time. And what have we got right at the moment? We've got time. And so, it's actually quite a blessing to have this time, and we can choose how we're using it at the moment. And I confess I haven't written any more chapters of the books that I was meant to be working on at this time. I'm working full time, as you mentioned, but I'm doing a lot of research and a lot of thinking. It'd be nice to sort of keep using it. So that's one of the first things I would say, is it's time to build networks, reach out, to really learn about things, because maybe I don't know about you, Tim, but when I talk to someone in a cafe or something, I actually try and find out what does that person really want to do, because a lot of us have ended up in jobs that probably weren't our first love, and we're doing these jobs because they paid well, or it was just where we ended up. And to shift is actually the inertia to shift away when we think, oh, but we're paying for the kids' school fees, and we're doing this, and maybe we'll change a bit later. It's difficult for me to sort of look at a random person who's been made unemployed and say, it's time to follow your dreams. But what I can do is tell my own story. And in 2009, which was towards the end, probably some of the tougher times of the GFC. As I mentioned earlier, I was working for a corporate consulting group. And what I saw is that the corporate consulting group, its model was fine while there were big budgets in that sort of 2000s up to about 2007, big budgets by government organizations and companies to do stuff, and they were paid very, very handsomely for that. But I also noticed that a lot of those contracts all disappeared overnight, the same way that I think you mentioned with your friend, their contracts that were going out to suppliers and all that, they all disappear, because people then go, we'll stop everything and then we'll restart just with what we think we need to start with. So these big contracts disappear. But I saw that you could actually create a business for what grandiosely called the corporation of one. And I had other friends who all went and started corporations of one, which is one person, me or you or whoever. And I knew I could probably pick up small pieces of work that the big consulting groups didn't want. And within the limits, I've never said I've never wanted to be a accountancy consultant or a HR consultant. I think they're both messy and too difficult for me. But things like corporate strategy and marketing and brand building and those sorts of things, I could start picking up small things, and then by gathering all that together and aggregating it, build a small company. So in 2009, as the GFC was still on, I started again. And I tell you what, you don't want to start a business Christmas 2009, January 2010, when you suddenly, it was nice and neat when I resigned from my previous job in, Christmas, but suddenly nothing happens in New Zealand in January, right? And so I was trying to rebuild. And I had a $225 secondhand 7-year-old laptop and just started to do exactly what I've just said. Just put feelers out to as many people as I could, and to this day, I'm massively thankful for a whole lot of people that were supportive and looked after me and brought a little bit of work in here and introduced me to someone else, and things happened. But I actually finally got rid of that laptop about 6 years later, and I think I'd done 7 figures worth of billings from that 225. It was actually an old Elam school laptop that I had bought when it got pensioned off. But that's it's really interesting. If you Google companies that were started during recessions, it's quite amazing. And the world's faced many recessions over time. And you can, the oil shocks in the 70s produced companies like Microsoft and things like in 2009 and 2010, you saw WhatsApp, Instagram, and Uber all start, generally by people who had been made redundant, and which is really quite interesting. So, but not all of us. I certainly couldn't code to save my life, but but there are things happening, but I think often we start by ourselves, but having multiple coalitions of these corporations of one. And you'll know, Tim, often we used to gather in Howick, we were all corporations of one, but a coffee between 3 or 4 of us suddenly created the network effect of contacts and opportunities, and plus the standard encouragement, mutual support, etc. And so I'd say this is the time that we have to make sure that we're feeding our dependents and that, and if we have to be dipping into some of the goodwill that we've had with the government for a while, we've all been good taxpayers and we've done that. If we're getting a little bit of money back to get us back on our feet, then I don't think we should ever be stressed about that and not judging ourselves for having to be on that. Sometimes we need a helping hand. But using this time as a breather, as a learning time, to take, to actually, maybe my dream was to start a gourmet chocolate company or a craft beer company or whatever. So learning about that. And nowadays you could spend a day on the internet and rapidly become a very, very well educated person in the sector. Yes, so that's what I'd be sort of kicking it back is, what do you want? It might be that after a day on the internet, you think, no way, am I ever going to be a master brewer or something? I'm going to do something else. But so I think that there's just so many positives at the moment, massive negatives, but the positives in terms of time and opportunity to take a breath and rethink are really powerful. The last thing I'd say was probably we shouldn't look to the government to lead us. The government is there, let's face it, it's a safety net, but in most cases, they don't understand business and they don't understand that individual sort of motivation to start a business or to do something a little bit different other than what they are used to. So, if we wait for the government to do something, then we're probably going to wait too long.
Excellent. Oh, that's great, David. Well, I actually, just before this, was having a discussion with my son, Michael, my younger son, 18 years old, first year university, studying business at Auckland Uni. And we were just talking about just various business things, and you're a big reader, and I love reading business books and other books as well. And of course, Malcolm Gladwell always has great stuff. And we're just talking about his book, David and Goliath, and his relating the story of David and Goliath, and the reason why. There's two reasons why David overcame this young, puny little teenager, overcame this huge giant. Was firstly, David changed the rules of engagement. So first, Goliath was determined to fight him in his way with a sword and shields. As you know, David rejected the offer of swords and shields from Saul, and he changed the way business was done. He came in a different way. He came with his slingshot and stones. So first of all, it was changing the engagement, not engaging at the giant's strength, but at his own strength. The second one was, of course, the giant. The problem with giants, they're big and strong, but they're very slow moving, and they don't always see, other than what's just in front of them, they don't see the opportunities around, even on the lower level in a sense, and hence he overcame the giant. And I think this is the time where we tend to be intimidated by, the big companies, the big, as you say, the countdowns, the food, the new worlds of the, and big food companies are saying, well, we could never compete against them, against these giants. Likewise, beverage companies and so on. But we are seeing the Davids coming in with a different strategy, with it not trying to take them head on, but actually coming with their own niches, and there will be those opportunities, and they won't necessarily bring the giants down, but they will certainly make an impact. And so, and I think that's the encouragement for these people, for many people who do feel that they've been disenfranchised, they don't have any special gifts or talents, to actually find out what their passion is, find out what their gifts are, what they'd love to do, and finally, actually exploit those in a way that they don't need to be intimidated by the giants around. So, and so that's what I do. That's the encouragement I give to people. I know it sounds maybe a bit glib, and I've always said that circumstances, it's amazing how quickly they can change. For David, we know that his whole life changed within a lunchtime. He just delivered some lunch for his brothers, and he walked away, marrying the king's daughter, and having not paying no taxes the rest of his life, and a whole lot of other benefits. So who knows what can happen when we do actually step out in faith and actually take up the opportunities that are in front of us. So, but look, David, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. It's been awesome. As you know, I love catching up with you. Hopefully we can have a coffee face to face in the same location sometime soon. But thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, and for your encouragement. And really appreciate your time today. So thank you so much.
Total pleasure. Thanks, Tim.
Cheers.